This episode of Uncorking a Story is brought to you by Mike Carlin's novel Uncorking a Murder. Uncorking a Murder can be purchased in paperback or ebook format wherever books are sold online. Enjoy the show.
I'm grateful that my serpentine path has had a lot of stops that I never would have dreamt of or not known how to create for myself.
Hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to share with you my interview with author and filmmaker Nick Braccia, whose book, Off the Back of a Truck, Unofficial Contraband for the Sopranos fan, is available for sale right now. Now, one thing I wanted to address up front is that unlike most of the people I've had the privilege of interviewing on the show, I actually know Nick personally. We met while working a summer job close to 30 years ago, and I actually helped him get his first, job out of school as a copywriter at the interactive agency I started my career at. Now, interestingly, at least I found this to be interesting, he left Simon & Schuster to take that copywriting job, and I think this is poetic because Tiller Press is an imprint of Simon & Schuster, and that is the publisher of his new book. So it's awesome to see how that came around full circle. But also, all this is to say, if you get a sense that there's some familiarity between us as you listen to this interview, it's because there absolutely is familiarity between us. I've known the guy for 30 plus years. One of the things I wanted to talk about before I share Nick's interview with you, and it's a good one, is that Nick mentions a few times during our conversation that he's had to kind of pause and reevaluate some of the choices he's made in his career. And oftentimes those choices were poor choices. And he'll be the first one to admit that. But so he's had to reevaluate those choices and then change his behavior accordingly to save his job. And I'm not going to give away all of his stories because you really have to hear him tell them. But it did lead me to reflect on something, which is how important it is to have that self-awareness, the self-awareness you need to make a change in your life, as well as have the strength and courage to take the steps to make those changes. And that's not easy for a number of reasons. Now, one of the reasons why it's not easy, it's because, we become vulnerable when admitting that we've been wrong about something or that we have some kind of deficiency somewhere. And one thing that I know that many of us are not good at is actually being vulnerable and potentially opening ourselves up to some kind of criticism. Now, sometimes this means, hitting a rock bottom of sorts, or it's being scared into doing something. But whatever the catalyst for change is, we're all faced with a decision to make, and that's either to stand still and accept the status quo or embrace change. And we all know what the right decision here is, right? I mean, if we believe in Charlie Darwin, we know that those of us who are more adaptive to change are the ones who will survive. So yes, it does require hard work to both identify the need for change and then to put change into motion. But unfortunately, that's not where the hard work ends. Oftentimes, things can get harder before they get better. Think about it. When you make a big change in your life, it can be seen as threatening to the people who are happy with the status quo. So change can be threatening to some people who are fine or just comfortable with the way things are. And this often comes into play in relationship dynamics. So imagine that, one half of a couple wants to make a change in their life, whether that's becoming healthier, and whether that health is mental or physical. Mental. I think I'm mentally unhealthy. No, whether that change is, either mental or physical, or maybe it's, one person wanting to learn how to be a better communicator, or that person wants to learn how to stand up for themselves more often. I know it sounds crazy because who wouldn't want their partner to improve in these areas, right? But the fact is, when one half of a couple takes steps to change their life in a big way, it can be seen as a threat to the relationship's dynamic. And, people might start asking questions, will she still love me after she loses all that weight? Or will he still want me after he addresses his own insecurities? Will I be okay with a new him or her? These are all questions that people might be asking themselves either consciously or subconsciously. And because of that, this person who's begun to make changes in their life can find themselves caught in a bit of a pickle play, trying to balance the desire to change with the tension that can erupt in their own personal life. So if that's your dynamic and if that's your reality, what do you do? Well, I have some thoughts. Now, I'm not a licensed therapist, people, but I have some life experience. For one, we need to remember that making big changes in your life requires support from other people. That's, you got to know that. So if you have a partner or a spouse, be open and honest with them about the changes you want to make in your life. Don't catch them off guard by just declaring something like, I'm going to change myself and this is how it's going to be. No, help make them part of your process and ask for their help. Now, that's something I am personally terrible with, asking for help. I mean, it's one of my known issues. But when you can ask for someone's help, and if you invite them to partner with you, and if they are partnered with you in that journey, it's less likely that they're going to become an adversary. Now, another thing to be aware of is how the things that you do and you say might be contributing to, the other person's insecurities around your change. So relationship dynamics involve inputs and outputs from two people. And so, if you're aware of how you contribute to that dynamic, and if you can be proactive about addressing those insecurities, that's going to help you along in this process with the other person. But here's the rub. And this is, it could be a big problem. It might be that the change you want to make alters your relationship dynamic so much that unless the other person is also open to changing, then the relationship could be in jeopardy. So take, for example, somebody who is always very easygoing in their life, maybe to the point where they're a people pleaser and they've never stood up for themselves. The person who always gave in and was frequently taken advantage of by another person in a relationship. Now, let's imagine that this has been going on for decades in a relationship. And when that person eventually finds the strength to change what it is about them that leads them to be constantly being walked over, when they start to have that strength and find that strength to finally start pushing back, it could very well lead to the end of a relationship unless the person who is doing the taking advantage of accepts the new dynamic. And if they can't, then things will eventually become untenable. Then it's time for you and your partner to have a sit down with someone like Dr. Melfi, who, of course, was Tony Soprano's therapist. Now, that, of course, brings me back full circle to Nick Braccia and his book, Off the Back of a Truck, Unofficial Contraband for the Sopranos fan. In this interview, Nick and I talk about his background, but also the important people who have had key influences on his career, namely a third-grade teacher, an ex-uncle, and a professor at the College of the Holy Cross. We talk about the importance of real support, encouragement, and acknowledgement, as well as the importance of putting in the work, being in the right place at the right time, and of course, sheer luck. And now, without any more pop psychology rants from yours truly, here's my conversation with author and filmmaker Nick Braccia. Braccia, the last time I saw you, we were in a tiki bar in LA.
Yeah.
Do you have any recollection of that evening?
I do. It's funny. That was at the Tonga Hut, which I love. And I was carried out of that bar that evening. And then I remember in the car I was in being like, wait a minute, my cell phone's in there, and having to go in and collect the phone. But that is one of my favorite tiki bars because the drinks are great. And although I like fancier tiki bars where they invest more in the design, that it's not snobby and too precious like some of the ones in LA and San Francisco can be. Although I pretty much love all tiki bars where they can mix a great drink, and we've got none. There isn't one in New York.
What's the fascination with you and tiki bars? I always wanted to know that.
Oh, that's a good question. It really came a lot from the culture of a place where I worked for 7 years, Campfire, where my creative partner there and my boss for a long time, Mike Manello, who was one of the he's a Florida guy. He was one of the producers of the Blair Witch Project back in the 90s. And he's been up in New York for about 15 years. He, as a collective, Campfire was really interested in subcultures, how they form, in an experience design. And tiki bars are really where that all comes together. I mean, it started as a trend after World War II. A lot of the guys that came back from the Pacific Theater had an affinity for that aesthetic, and it became a place where like or a vibe where like essentially shell-shocked guys or guys who had done their time over there could go. And just from a contemporary standpoint, they're so transportive. And there's two in particular that were amazing experiences for me. One was when I was visiting my in-laws at the time. They were living in Houston. Now they live closer to Austin. But there's a very, very good tiki bar called Lay Low in Houston. And you pull into this little strip mall parking lot. There's like a 7-Eleven and a laundromat. And then you see this other storefront. And it's just everything's very nondescript. And you're like, where am I? And all the windows are blacked out. There's a canoe outside, which gives it away a little bit. But you open the door and you really feel like you're entering another world. It feels like the climate changes, the vibe changes. And people put so much care into it. This particular place, they made their own orgeat syrup, and it was really good. And the similar places, I got a buddy, another colleague from when I worked at Campfire, Steve Colson. He lives in Nutley, New Jersey, and he actually completely redid his garage and turned it into a bi-level tiki bar. It's gorgeously designed. It can hold up against, it looks as good as any tiki bar in the country. And now and again, it's been different since COVID. I'll take an Uber 35 minutes out to Nutley, walk past his house. He's got a wonderful family and 4 kids, go right into that garage, and I'm in a different world. So it's for the transportive experience design properties, and the drinks are really good.
No, that's important. So
it is. You're like, I waited all that time to talk about alcohol, but the drinks all have great story. Have their own origin stories, from like Don the Beachcomber and Trader Vic, and it's just kind of fun.
Well, I know that we do want to talk about the new book, which I promise we will get to. But before we get into that, I always like to do a little biographical portrait of the authors we have on the show. So just starting off with, Nick, where did you grow up, and just kind of paint a picture of what your childhood was like back in those days?
Oh boy, so. I was born in Stamford, but quickly moved to Norwalk. My dad was a Stamford, Connecticut family, and my mom was a Norwalk, Connecticut family, and both civil servants. My mom was a nurse, my dad a cop. So, we grew up, I'd say middle class, but working middle class for Fairfield County, of course, is it's a tricky place to grow up, and just very, very normal, like. Fairly overprotective parents. So I just grew up doing sports and things like that. And went to public school through 8th grade. And it was right around that time. I think I was always writing. Like school was tricky until about 3rd grade. And I had a very, very supportive teacher, a Mrs. Vogt, who I think still lives in Fairfield. And it was then that I really started to develop taste and something of a style or a voice. But it was really in like that 8th, 9th grade period when Twin Peaks came out that I was like, because we weren't a very arty family at all. It was like, Star Wars, like Steven Spielberg movies. We were early to video games. We were early to VHS, but not with any like discerning taste. It was just like, this stuff's fun and cool. It was also safe. Like we weren't kids. My parents really liked having us at home, which meant we had a lot of ways to entertain ourselves there, versus the cool kids who, were in, riding their bikes all around town and doing whatever. So, and then I went to Fairfield Prep for high school.
Before we get to high school, tell me more about this Mrs. Vogt and the impact she had on you. It sounds like something happened.
She was really great. I had my early teachers, in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. None of them seemed real happy to be there. And none of them I didn't feel like any of them took a particular interest in me. And there were certainly areas where I was behind, like penmanship and things like that. And it was with Mrs. Vogt that I first felt any like real support and encouragement or acknowledgement. And I'll never forget this. One of the first things I ever won in my life. I might have won a jump roping contest earlier than that. Turns out I'm an exceptional jump roper, but that's a whole nother podcast.
Mr. Double Dutch over here.
I got a what's that?
It said Mr. Double Dutch over here.
Oh, I didn't do double Dutch. I didn't. But I can still speed rope a little bit. So Mrs. Vogt, like she had keys, and you got stars when you got hundreds on spelling tests, and I got through the whole year getting 100% on every spelling test, and she made a big deal out of that, and like made people wanted to see if I was gonna do it. Was I gonna pull it off? Was I gonna get the whole year? And there was a class play where she gave me a part in, but she saw something. I don't know if I want to say that she favored me, but I certainly felt encouraged, acknowledged, and like that was the beginning of developing some sense of confidence and pride academically. And it could be that all the kids in the class look back at her and feel that same thing. Like, I don't know that I got preferential or special treatment. I just know that to some degree I entered the next grade, feeling like I was somebody.
Gotcha. So she kind of sparked something in you that no one else had done to that point.
And I can't believe I buried the lead. The other thing that she did was that she read to the class, and she read Judy Blume's Freckle Juice. Mm-hmm. And it's a great story. It's a great story to read a bunch of 8-year-olds. And, it's one I read to my daughter now. I probably started reading her Freckle Juice when she was like 5 because she likes the story so much. But that was a gateway. She was very smart. So, Judy Blume was all the rage back in, 1980. This would have been 85.
Yeah, she was.
And it was, her reading Freckle Juice was a gateway to me as someone who reads for pleasure.
I'm curious, like back in those days when you were growing up in sort of suburban Connecticut in the 80s, did you have like what did you want to be? I mean, both your parents were silver surfers.
They were heralds for Galactus, Mike.
But did you, were you thinking, cop, fireman, doctor? Where was your head at back in those days?
My head was second base for the Yankees, but okay. it turns, I don't know. There was, I think, at that time, I still think you think, yeah, I can play Major League Baseball, and you don't realize how hard that is. At that age, I don't think I was thinking too much about it. I can't remember what I would write down if people would, or what I would say when people said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I did have an uncle he's an ex-uncle now, but we're still friendly on Facebook, who I probably met about that time. I can't remember what year he married my aunt. He was a guy from Greenwich who taught music at a high school in Harrison, New York. But they eventually lived in Norwalk. But he was a kung fu guy, and he was a movie guy, and he scored he scored a short that got nominated for an Oscar, and he went and took meetings in Hollywood, and he was very much like, I thought he was the coolest thing in the world, because I was like, oh, he has a creative career and he's an adult who knows. I mean, I say an adult, he was probably 28 at the time. He I guess 28 is an adult, but now at us in our mid 40s, 28 seems like, get some years on you, kid. But he was like, oh, it was like, woo, he's got this, I kind of worshipped him at the time. Because he was like this creative guy who made his living that way and had this huge studio in his basement. And I was like, oh, a creative career. But it was always pulling at me. like this, like it was always positioned as something very dangerous. As I said, my parents are super responsible. My mom, I hesitate to use the term overprotective, but I will. But I remember I took the Myers-Briggs test. They, our guidance counselor sometime in high school, like rolled out the Myers-Briggs test, and it was like, he's an extroverted creative, whatever it was. It like equated when she heard that's not going to make any money or have health insurance, and she was like that. And I remember she said this, and I never really even talked to her about it, but she said, "That's not really you. That sounds like a wannabe."
Interesting.
And it friggin' crushed me.
Yeah.
And I've always really walked these two paths subsequently professionally between my creative endeavors, and I've always had, except for the last 2 weeks, actually, are catching me at an interesting time. I've had a full-time job, more or less, with health insurance for the last 22 years. Yeah. And I haven't, any dice rolling I've done has been with the house's money, so to speak, or, on my own on my own hours moonlighting. I haven't really taken the big risks. And I think, and there's reasons why that's good and reasons why that's bad, but it's, I think that all came from, early on, I was intrigued by this notion of being a creative professional or creative endeavors. And I wouldn't say I was wholly discouraged from that, but security was certainly placed at the forefront of what I should be, what my parents wanted to invest in, and what they felt like I should be pursuing, because they were worried.
Yeah, but it's tough though when you have people in your life who you kind of like love and respect, and who mean very well, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
But when they say things like that, I'm very conscious of this with my own kids. But when they say things that they don't mean to be discouraging, but it's hard to take it as anything but, hey, do the safe thing, don't follow that dream. Like, yes. Sometimes I wish somebody came to me in sort of my early 20s, like before I graduated college, and said, hey, you know what? Now's the time in your life where you can really explore and, have a little bit of an adventure, take a year off and then come back and figure out what you want to do. Because I look back on my own, my own journey in my career, and I'm like, man, I've never been satisfied in anything I've done. And I really wish I had, that sort of nudge to say, you know what? You're going to be working for the rest of your life, do something now that's going to really help you figure out what you want to do. Because, I wanted to be a psychologist, from the time I was 18. And then I decided, not to pursue that. I got a job in advertising, and the rest was kind of history. But anyway, sorry, this interview was more about you than about me. But I do recognize.
Hey, you got me my first job in advertising that I almost got fired from like 8 times. I still don't know how I didn't get fired. Somebody must have had a crush on me or something, because I really should have gotten fired. I did not have. I would have fired me.
Well, let's dial it back a second. So you do the Fairfield prep thing. You go to Holy Cross.
Yes,
I do.
Did a year in England abroad, which is the best year of my life, I'd say.
Right. What was so great about that year?
Oh God, it was so much fun, and it shows up in the book that we'll talk about. A guy that I met there is one of the main contributors, aside from me, of the book. There were so many things that were great about it. Well, I was never a popular kid. I was like always in the mix and stuff. But when I came over, like an East Coast kid in the UK, I think there was a bit of a novelty to me, kind of like fast talking. I was like a fast talking, jokey American, I think, delivering what they had seen on television. And so I was kind of cool, which was new. And I played ultimate frisbee, and the guys on that and the women on that team were just really fun. And I also had my first like serious girlfriend over there. It was an English girl who's now married to a French chef, because of course she is, and lives in a beautiful countryside of England. I'm not bitter. And and the teachers were great, and I learned so much, and I just really liked their sensibility and that culture. And there were just fascinating things that I hadn't seen. I was coming from Holy Cross, where you couldn't get condoms on campus to at all, like, and to where they literally have them in the bathrooms and vending machines of the library of the university I was at. I was like, all right, this place seems okay.
In case the mood strikes when you're in the bathroom at the library.
Exactly. It was it was a great time to be there in terms of pop music. It was right in the middle of, Blur and Oasis. I had done radio shows and I had done a lot of radio at my college, but the bar was higher in the UK with auditioning and the relationship that the students had to the BBC. So getting on, doing like advancing, at the time it was, I don't want to say my radio career, but my interest in programming and presenting. I would say DJing, but DJing now means something kind of else now. But hosting radio shows I really enjoyed, and just living with different people from different countries. Like it was amazing. Just in my flat was there was a British girl, the woman next to me. She was very young at the time. I think she was like 17 when she started university. She was Lebanese, but born and raised in Greece. There was an Italian woman. There was a guy from Malaysia. It was just like, I was surrounded by great people, and plenty of people from my college, from Holy Cross, that I liked, and other people from like Northwestern. A guy who I still talk to almost every day, Eddie McNamara, who's in the Sopranos book, he was from Brooklyn, I think the Marine Park area, and had gone to Stony Brook, and we met over there. And it was like I had this buddy who I could make jokes about Curtis Sliwa with, and I would see him across campus, he would see me, and we'd break into Ric Flair struts, and we would just strut, and like everyone else is looking at us like, who are these mooks? Who are these weirdos? But it was just great. And the school part was like, I liked the classes I took and the professors, but I was just a kid in a candy store all year. And it was the year that Tony Blair won the election. So from a political standpoint, it was, the country was shifting. I was at a super liberal university in a beach town. It was just great.
So when you finally leave Holy Cross, what's your first step? Where do you start your career?
Lifeguarding at the Italian Center in Stanford. And there was, I took a few video production jobs, working as a production assistant at a place called National Video Center. My very first gigs, and I started talking to these people when I was still in college. There was a woman named Laura Hill and her husband, Arthur Timpanaro, who lived in Norwalk next to my now deceased uncle, who ran their own production company. She worked full time. She had been at Ryan Partnership, but she also was doing her own projects. And they brought me on to PA a bit, and it was like, okay, here's a list of all the props that we need. We need them tomorrow. You need to get a foam brain and a jar to keep it in, and this other huge list of things. Go figure it out. And that was like my introduction to the business. But my first job offer actually came from Simon & Schuster, who's now my publisher, where I interviewed, at first, a friend of mine from Holy Cross put my resume in, and I interviewed to be the editorial assistant on their Star Trek imprint. And I thought I was killing it in the interview. The woman is like, how do you feel about Star Trek? I'm like, I know it. I know the difference between a Klingon and a Romulan and yada, yada. I'm not a huge Star Trek guy at all, but I have base pop culture knowledge. And then I think I'm killing the interview, and she pulls this box out from under her desk, and it's filled with these little furry things. And she's like, can you tell me what these are?
Oh,
and
shit.
I'm like, no. And she's like, those are tribbles. She's like, you don't know what tribbles are? I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm unfamiliar with your tribbles. And I did not get that job because I did not identify tribbles properly.
That's the trouble with tribbles right there.
But they were like, oh, we still like this kid. So they threw me over to international sales, and I became an international sales assistant. And I'm still quite friendly with all the people I had at that first job. And that was it was filling boxes, doing returns. I think I started at $21,500 a year. So you're taking the train in, and that's half your money. And the other half goes to lunch. So that was, that I stayed there for about 9 months and then of course I ended up at Moda Media, which was my first creative director job. I'm sorry, creative job as a copywriter. And I tell this to kids today coming out of college of how different it was. getting that it was before the .com bubble burst, and they needed talent so badly that I more or less wrote 3 fake like banners for eBay, like on like a napkin, pretty much, and just like brought them to this guy, and all of a sudden I got a job, like in like a 50% pay increase from what I was making, and I'm like. They needed warm bodies who had a familiarity with the internet, as quick, and some semblance of critical thinking skills, as quickly as possible. But it was very, very different. We stepped into the working world at frankly, a much easier time.
Well, I mean, but it took you from like selling books, if you will, internationally to like being a creator.
I never was really selling the books. I was like I was the helper for the department. They would bring in a burlap sack of sliced off covers from India, and I would have to like count them. Like I wasn't like, it wasn't like, hey, Singapore, how many copies of the new Stephen King bestseller would you like? Yeah. Like I was assisting the guys that traveled all over the world and sold the books. But thank you.
The assistant to the traveling secretary.
I was assistant to the international cowboys, they called them.
But I guess the point is you got into a place where you were actually doing some creation, right? So this uncle, this mysterious 28-year-old uncle you had, who was into kung fu and music and scoring pictures, who inspired you at one point. Now you're doing it. Now, like, what was that? What was that sense? What did that do for your soul? Like when you started like creating things?
When I first showed, it took a while. Like what I'll say is that I was terrible at that first job because I didn't understand the rules, and and part of it was everyone was young. The bosses were young. You're moving quickly. And I had, I was definitely young and immature, and I was trying to, move out of my parents' house and figure out who I am. But I still remember the first brief I got was for Citibank for City Wallet, this application that was meant to, and we had to do banner campaigns for City Wallet. And I just thought I could be like wild and creative. I didn't understand the parameters. And I remember sitting in one of my boss's offices and being like, well, what I think they should do is we should do a whole campaign around cows and how cows really want you to use City Wallet because there'll be less leather used, and they don't want to be killed for their leather, so they should be really psyched about this digital wallet. And I remember they just looked at me and they were like, no. You gotta
Dave Shabak wasn't down with that idea.
No, they were not down with that idea. And it was after 9 months, I started to get it. And I always do well with call them what you want, mentors, rabbis. And there was a guy there. I found one there, and his name was Joel Trenton. And he, the other guys, I think they were a little nervous. They were young and kind of like worried themselves. Joel had been around the block, and I think he saw that I had some raw talent and that I needed a little guidance that I don't think anyone else had necessarily the patience at the time to provide. And I don't blame those guys. I was very, very difficult, but I did start to find something of a path and a voice with Joel's, with Joel's support. And I stayed there, I stayed there 9 months working on mostly on Citibank, but a few other things came in. And then I got the job at Gray Interactive, which got me into the city, which got me a little more money. And it took a couple of years there. But by the time I was, there was a time when I was 26, maybe 25. I had been dating a girl in LA, flying out there all the time, which I couldn't afford, and was thinking of becoming a teacher. I even took the test to become a public school teacher in the state of California. And I was definitely about to get fired from Gray Interactive because my attitude sucked. And then she and I broke up, and I had all this debt, and and that was where the rubber met the road for me, was when it was probably in like late 2002, early 2003, where I was like, oh wait, I need this job. I've got a lot of debt and I have to get another job. So at that point I started a really strong relationship with my ECD. I felt kind of grateful to have this job, to be working on M&Ms. And I started coming up and selling, big ideas. But it's wild at the time that my career really came together. And I matured, was also when I was moonlighting Wednesday nights, Wednesday nights, Friday nights and Saturday nights at this insane dive bar in Hell's Kitchen. So I basically, had these two lives and kept my eyes open, my nose clean, and started to develop a good reputation in the company and in the industry.
Okay. So, I mean, it's great that you eventually had that self-awareness that, hey, I gotta make a little shift here.
And people looking out for me. Like, I had a lot of other people got laid off and fired probably when I should have. There was a time when I was dating this very hardworking copywriter, and we had just broken up, and we got put on the same pitch, and it was going to be based on we had an acrimonious breakup, and it was going to be based on the performance on the pitch, who kept their job.
Oh shit.
And we kind of knew that going in. And so she's been, I think, a public school teacher for 20 something years. And I've had this career in advertising. I don't know who the winner was in that situation.
Yeah. Well, that's like Thunderdome shit.
It was it was total Thunderdome when the bubble burst. But I somehow survived by some combination of guile, charm, talent, and luck. Just like, so I was very, very grateful for that. And I'm still in touch with all my, and very thankful for all my bosses from that period. My CDs and ECDs, I still talk to them fairly regularly.
Yeah. Well, let's bridge the gap between kind of the Sopranos book coming out and kind of, where you were after the bubble burst. Like, what led you to, and I love the story because it is full circle, because your publisher is your, first employer. But just kind of bridge that time period for me in terms of like how you got to all of a sudden, writing a book on the Sopranos.
I've been having this discussion with a really dear friend of mine, Andrew Green, who's he's a partner at this firm, Andreessen Horowitz, but he was my client when I was working on Electronic Arts. We became very close. And what I've realized is that through life, like, we compare our styles. Like, he creates opportunity by foraging and being, to use a boxing metaphor, like a pressure fighter. And he always has very clear direction on where he's going. My approach has always been different, for better or worse. I'm more of a counter puncher. Like, I'm kind of just like standing there and things come at me and I see opportunities and I kind of just like grab them. And it stuff just like is, if you stay busy, but not necessarily like with any pressure in a particular direction, like stuff just seems to find me. And like, I get used to saying yes. So, I mean, part of that, I've always been a moonlighter. Like, to use a term I first heard when Travis Bickle was applying for his taxi license and taxi driver, and they were like, "What do you want to do this for?" He's like, "You moonlighting?" He's like, "What's moonlighting?" But that's a whole nother story. I was very early in, like, I had my job, but I was also like an alternate reality game designer. I would always have like my side hustles. That's a sort of a nasty term these days when none of us can really just have one job, but it's, I've always had these side hustles, and whether it's in game development or game design or other creative products or writing screenplays or what have you. But I'd never really, aside from one class I took when my daughter was born in horror fiction, I hadn't really pursued long form writing. And the way this came together is very accidental, and I'm very grateful. A lot of things in my life seem very accidental. That I've had at Campfire. HBO was a longtime client of ours, so I spent a lot of time in meetings up at their office. And maybe 3 years ago or so, or two, when was it? No, not 3, 2, maybe 2.5 years ago. I was I was up at HBO for meetings about Watchmen, like a year and a half before Watchmen came out. I was probably watching an early pilot. I was taking some notes, and I got out of their office. And what's important here is that at the time, they're now over in Hudson Yards, but HBO was right at the corner of Bryant Park, in the Grace Building, or at least adjacent to the Grace Building. And just up the block from that is the Simon and Schuster building. It's like, a 4-minute walk from HBO's front door. So I get out of this meeting at HBO late in the afternoon, and I'm like, I don't want to go back down to Tribeca. It's like 3:00 or something. So I call a friend of mine, Sam Ford, who's the director of cultural intelligence for Tiller Press, which is an imprint there. And Sam I've known for a long time through where I started in the alternate reality game community. He came through a media program at MIT. He studied under and wrote a book with Henry Jenkins, who's been an important person in my field for the last 15 or 16 years, and is also a contributor to the Sopranos book. But I called Sam, and he picked up the phone, which I was surprised that he was even around. I was like, hey man, can I just go camp out in your office and use your Wi-Fi to finish my workday? And he said, yeah. And I had been there before and had met his boss. We had gone, Teresa DeMasi, as part of Campfire. We had gone up there to meet them and talk about story worlds and things like that, just as a general like meet and greet a few months earlier. So I was like, oh, I'll pop in and I'll get my work done for the rest of the day. So we start working, but I end up in this conversation with Sam and Teresa about lots of things. We always have very like far-reaching conversations, touch on all sorts of stuff. But we start talking about peak TV, and I just start riffing like book opportunities for them to pursue, because Tiller Press has a different model based on underserved markets, niche subcultures where there's opportunities, and being able to kind of react to culture quickly. And so we start talking about peak TV books, and the conversation turns to The Sopranos. And when I start talking about The Sopranos, I see Teresa especially light up. Turns out, she was a big fan of the show. And as I'm talking about its place in TV history and about what the show meant to me, not necessarily as an Italian American, but that's part of it, I think. I see her get kind of very excited, and we continue this conversation for a while, and she's like, that should be a book. And I think as an aside, she's like, you should write it. And I'm just kind of like, shrug it off. Like, I'm like, oh, when will I do that? And so it was very, very nice to hang out with them, and I leave, and I don't know, 9 weeks later, I get an email from Sam. It's like, do you want to come back up and discuss that Sopranos book? I'm like, what Sopranos book? So I went back up, and I was like, it's one of those things where like opportunity knocks, I answer. Like, of course I'm going to come back up and hear what they have to say. I didn't think about what it was going to take. I didn't think about how I was going to do it. I just went up and I sat in a room for an hour brainstorming what the book could be. And then I wrote a one pager description. And pretty much the next day, they were like, we're going to do this. And here's when it's due, and we're going to time it with a big part of the potential for the book was that I mentioned to them. I can't remember if they knew this or not, that there was a Sopranos movie that was greenlit and that was coming out, that was going to be a prequel. So the opportunity to time the book with the movie was very attractive to them. Like if I had said I want to do this about Twin Peaks, which I also love, I would have missed it. It wouldn't have been as relevant because Twin Peaks season 3 had already hit. So I wrote up a proposal for what the book could be. And the actual book ended up being a little different from the proposal, but all of a sudden it was like, yeah, you've got this and you've got this many months to do it. And, good luck, kid. And you can have a little budget for contributors. So because I knew right away I wouldn't be able to have a full-time job and pull off writing the whole thing myself.
Yeah. So I just need to pause for a second, because it's, I'm sure some people who are listening to this are screaming, because this isn't typically how this stuff happens. Usually it's, somebody off somewhere who has got an idea. They put together the proposal. If it's nonfiction, it's the proposal. If it's fiction, they write the damn thing, and then they try to find an agent to represent it. And then they get rejected 7,000 times. And yours, I mean, it's sort of a unique story in that regard, where it was an idea born out of a brainstorm. You didn't necessarily follow up on it until they called you and said, "Hey, you want to come up and talk about that book?" And then you write a proposal, and then all of a sudden, boom, you have the deal.
Yeah, one thing I want to clarify though is that, I mean, Tiller is very unique. I mean, they're in Simon and Schuster, but they're very nimble and fast moving, and their model is different. In that the advances comparatively are generally on the lower end, but there's but you've got the marketing support, and there's potentially more chance for upside. But I still have no manager, no agent, so it was. There's certainly a contract and a deal, but it's not like everything happened and it's like, this is changing. It wasn't the kind of deal that it would allow me to do this anywhere near full time.
Right. Gotcha. So it's not like you're quitting the day job to.
I'd say it was winning the lottery of opportunity versus winning the financial lottery.
So just out of curiosity, where does you mentioned kind of being an Italian American and having an appreciation of The Sopranos. Like, how important was that show, in general? Because I certainly was a big fan. I mean, it was definitely appointment viewing, back in the day, before I had a DVR, you had to watch it. It was Sunday nights, right? You had to watch it on Sunday nights, or, there wasn't no video on demand back then either. So to me, that was like the first show I remember really being like appointment viewing for me. But
yeah, it's I didn't watch it right at the beginning. I was in a tough period right in '99. So I think I started watching in season 2, and I watched the series 6 times since then. And certainly it was a huge, by the time seasons 2 and 3, like especially season 3 came around, I was, it was hardcore appointment viewing. But it's a show that's really resonated with me over the last 2 decades. In that, it's a satire. The show's a satire. The Sopranos is a comedy. It's an awfully a dark comedy, but it's this. We grew up in the same place, Mike. So you would get this for sure. But it uses these mobsters as a proxy for the disease of conspicuous consumption, consumer culture, all the places that America has really been heading as it's become more homogenized, and also, really the death of the first. Well, I say first, I mean really that the death of the immigrant cultures that came over, end of 19th, early 20th century. The Irish, the Italian, the German, the European immigrants, all who had, it was like when my dad was growing up in Stanford, his whole family lived on one block. Everybody they talked to was Italian. All of that stuff, that cultural identity has kind of fallen by the wayside and been replaced. So I think that David Chase is kind of like acknowledges that stuff, finds some value in it, but also kind of laughs at it. So all in all, I just think it was like the great American comedy of our age. But I also felt like I, as a tri-state area Italian American, not Jersey necessarily, that was 90 minutes away, it just really all landed. It landed for me, and it stayed with me over the years. And I revisited it right after my daughter was born, and there's a lot of home time. I watched it again, and then of course I watched it again multiple times in the context of putting the book together. I want to go back to something you just said in terms of like kind of how our society has changed, in terms of when your father was younger, his whole family lived on the same block. What specifically changed, and why did it change? Oh, I think what changed is that I think there's lots of reasons. One, intercultural marriage was happening, so families got dispersed. Education and opportunity, right? It's this great irony for all of the first, second, third generation, like immigrant parents who work really, really hard to push their kids beyond working into this middle class that allegedly articulates that you've kind of arrived. Now, whether or not that's a whole big lie or not is something, that could be another podcast. But by virtue of supporting your children and giving them stuff, they go and find new worlds and new opportunities, and they spread their wings, to use a cliche, and that takes them off the block. And often that's something they're never forgiven for. But it's kind of what happens. I just think it's just straight up cultural assimilation.
Yeah.
It happens. It's not entirely unique to America, but it's certainly part of the American experiment and experience.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that we're only a few generations away from, like my grandparents coming to this country, right?
Yeah.
Or yours for that matter. And then how rapidly things can change. And I don't always think they change for the better.
No, they certainly don't change for the better. I think The Sopranos would argue. I mean, I think The Sopranos is kind of, and David Chase is kind of bemused and uses the show as this, as this platform for all of the contradictions, the contradictions and ironies. I mean, I think that's what the show's getting at culturally. I think that the overall thesis of the show is that maybe Americans, people, what have you, just don't really change, and that change is extremely hard, and it's going against the current in our capitalist consumerist society is, it's very, if you try to go against the current, you're going to end up alone and out to sea.
Right.
But it's very, very difficult. And we see so many characters on the show try to go their own way, try to go against the current, and just comically, brutally, tragically fail time and time again.
Right. Now, are both of your parents are still around?
Well, as of 2 days ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't talked to them today.
But I guess I'm just curious as to, like, now that you've got this like physical book, and I know you've done many other things over the years that can prove to them that, hey, you can make a living doing, something that's more creative. But now you've got this like physical, tangible thing that can be shipped to their home, sent to their friends, sold in bookstores. Are you tempted to say, hey, look, I did do it. I could do this.
There's two books this year with the Video Palace book. And I want to be clear, like the Video Palace book, I created this horror franchise with the aforementioned Mike Manello. And I commissioned the stories and edited and rewrote some stuff, but I didn't write that whole book. And the Sopranos book, I've put together as a party. I wrote about 60% of it, maybe less, maybe 50%. But because I did understand, as you mentioned before, how lucky I was to fall into this opportunity. I wanted to bring a lot of, I wanted to basically, the idea for the book was that it's a party where I invite all the people that I know and love, who I think would be the most interesting people with diverse points of view and perspectives at a Sopranos party. So the book is largely, and parts of it are mostly my voice, but there's all these other voices sprinkled throughout it, writing on an assortment of topics that I'm not qualified to write on, like psychiatry, like food, like fashion. Like my mentor and professor, Steve Weinberg from Holy Cross, who really in a lot of ways was the godfather of this book, wrote a wonderful book on method acting, and he writes an essay on method acting in The Sopranos. So it's not entirely my initiative. But to go back to your question, it's something I've thought about it, but it's like, my feeling is like, there's part of me that would love to be like, I could have done this the whole time. I had it in me. Instead, I took advertising jobs for giant corporations and got paid okay. But like, why didn't you let me be the person I wanted to be? But at the same time, I like to think at 44, almost 45 years old, that I'm mature enough to know that that's not going to do any good except hurting them. Like, they were just trying to protect me and did the best that they can. And in one way or another, I've gotten there. I've produced, I have a horror fiction franchise. I've got this book. Like I'm grateful that my serpentine path has had a lot of stops that I never would have dreamt of or not known how to create for myself. And, I believe that stuff happens for three reasons combined. I actually hate the phrase "everything happens for a reason," but I think if you show up enough, and Woody Allen has that great line that like 90% of life is just showing up. If you do like work hard, and that two other things enough times will touch you, and those things are timing and luck. And I've been not everything's been a home run, but I've had enough timing, and you have some agency in the notion of timing when you choose to do things. Like part of that's just the showing up. So there's the hard work and maybe some innate talent, but certainly a talent and craft that I've worked on, and then you get lucky and you call your shots. That at least a few good things will probably happen that you wanted to happen. So I don't really feel any value in. I've had the itch and I've thought about it, but I don't think I'm going to go back and be like, I could have been doing this at 22, because I couldn't have been. I was so stupid. I couldn't have been doing any. I'm lucky. I'm lucky. For how dumb I was at 22. I'm lucky I'm alive. So I have the feeling, but I'm more just like looking forward. Like, what can I create from here? What's next? Who do I want to be going forward? There's not, when I think, when I'm unhappy about areas where I've landed, I more think of myself rather as the victim of other people, as a Jacob Marley character. I'm like if I'm rattling these chains because I failed to make purposeful choices and have ended up in something, then that's on me, and I can either figure out how to undo that. And the thing I try to do when I'm mentoring people is I'll use that Jacob Marley metaphor and be like, you don't want to be that. Like, think and make purposeful choices, so at least you'll understand how you got where you are. Because there's nothing worse, and I've done it a lot. There's nothing worse than being like, how did I get here? This is awful. And really having to think about the choices that you didn't make, or that things that you let happen. But that's the Jacob Marley metaphor is a frequent and recurrent one in my my life.
Yeah, it's certainly an appropriate time of year to be thinking about.
And it's funny, I don't mention Marley, but there is a Christmas Carol is, I believe, and I don't think anyone has ever has articulated this prior to my book. One of my favorite episodes of The Sopranos uses a Christmas Carol structure and illusions, which is the episode. Am I allowed to talk about spoilers or no?
Sure, go right ahead.
Oh, there's the episode in season 5. Whoever did this, which is Joe Pantoliano, Connecticut, Fairfield County resident, Joey Pants, the Ralphie Cifaretto character he played, who was a real son of a bitch, dies, but he is given this chance, sort of a chance at redemption, and is visited by 3 people, but he's such a shithead that he's not actually afforded the reconciliation.
Joey Pants. As we wrap up here, I want to go back to kind of where we started, which is kind of, you getting that real support, encouragement, and acknowledgement for the first time. And, as writers, you need, we have a hunger, I believe, many of us have a hunger for validation, to know that the stuff that we produced is being appreciated or liked by somebody.
Yep.
But if you could have Mrs. Vogt sitting here right now, what would you want to tell her? What would you express to her?
It's funny because I actually months and months ago, because I probably haven't seen her since I was like in 6th grade or something, was the last time that I went back. But I found her daughter on Facebook, and I wrote to her daughter and said, I'm an old student of your mother's. And she's thanked in the book, along with some other great teachers that I had, in the acknowledgement section. But I wrote to her daughter and was like, I'd love to get a copy of this book to your mom, but I didn't hear back from her. But I did. That was something that I wanted to do. I just would let her know how much of a difference she made and what a great teacher she was. And some of it, I'm sure, was timing and chemistry, and some of it was probably just who she was and how she showed up for her job every day. I don't know what she saw in me. I don't know if she'll even remember me, but whatever she did was right. And Steve, who I still talk to all the time, he's been at Holy Cross for 34 years, maybe 35 now. Is a dear friend, and it's through his classes at Holy Cross, American film as narrative, and the friendships that I founded there that, there's 3 other of Steve's students appear in the book, Andy Cambria, Mark DeLello, and Dr. John Hastings. And, that was, really how I formed my sensibility. But all of those guys that I mentioned I was a good critical writer and I wrote strong stuff, but they were all better than I was. And part of writing this, and Steve's writing's incredible. He himself was mentored by the famous New Yorker film critic Pauline Kael, who was a friend of his until her death in 2001. And I wanted to prove to myself in my critical analysis, in addition to my kind of project management and editorial skills in shaping and creative direction skills in shaping this book, that I could really play on the field with these guys. And that was something I wanted to, prove to myself. Because I've questioned it all these years. Like, how good could I really be? So going through the editing process, having Steve tell me bravo, how proud he was of the final product and to be a part of it, and how good he thought my stuff was, meant as much to me today as, getting an A on my paper on The Long Goodbye as a senior in 1998 meant to me. Huge. I mean, I'm getting actually a little emotional just thinking about it, but that's why I did it.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like I look back on teachers that I've had, whether it's college, high school, even younger, grammar school, and gosh, you really get the sense that these people really aren't paid enough for the value.
Oh, it's like being a priest in my estimation. I mean, like tenured college professors, I think do okay, but like I would love to be a high school teacher, but it's like, I mean, in our economy, it's essentially, if you don't come from money or have, multiple incomes in a house, it's essentially like being a priest.
Yeah. Gosh, it's,
it's a gorgeous, amazing choice to make. I just don't know that I've got the courage to make it.
Yeah. Well, the no sex thing is kind of
I meant the t-shirt thing.
I knew exactly what you meant, but I could not say it. Well, Nick, this has been great. Thank you very much for spending some time talking with me about this new book. I'm very excited by it. Now the holidays are coming up. I imagine it would make a great gift for.
It's called "Off the Back of a Truck: Unofficial Contraband for the Sopranos Fan" by Nick Braccia and some friends of ours.
So where can one find more information about this book, should they want to?
If you just go to bit.ly, bit.ly, / I can't remember if it's a backslash or a /, but if you're listening, you probably know, Sopranos book. And it's a nice little short link that Simon & Schuster set up, but just Googling it, it'll easy to find. But I think if you like the show, that the book will feel like a party. It's not an episode guide. It's really meant to enhance appreciation and, just let you get your salsa leech on.
That's right. So the holidays are coming, people, and I'm sure this makes a great gift for the Sopranos fan in your life.
Yeah, and if you let Mike know that you bought a copy, I will get a box of ziti shipped to your house, uncooked. A box of ziti.
Yeah,
guaranteed.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, thank you very much, Nick. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Always great to catch up with you.
Well, there you have it. My conversation with Nick Braccia, or Nick Braccia, if you're my twin brother Jimmy, because that's how he always pronounced Nick's last name. I hope you enjoyed it. And as a reminder, his book, Off the Back of a Truck, Unofficial Contraband for the Sopranos fan, is available wherever books are sold. And believe me, it makes a great gift for any Sopranos fan in your life. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, check out more at uncorkingastory.com or through iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe so you can stay up to date with every new episode and maybe even listen to some of those old ones. There's some great ones in there. And lastly, if you want to learn more about me and my books, please be sure to visit MikeCarlin.com. That's Carlin with an O and not an I. And at that website, you can, of course, buy any of my books for the reader in your life. Christmas is coming, people. So is Hanukkah. So I'll end by saying, for all of us here at Uncorking the Story, this is Mike Carlin saying thanks for listening.